Hey, okay. So this session, basically, we want to make sure we're adding the Joy framework. It's basically a schema validator that we can use to do all sorts of really handy things for APIs. So let's get started. So uh, first thing to do when you have to install, well, basically start working with the JUI framework, you have to install it. I already did that, so I can just skip that step. So Um, so what we're going to do is we're going to jump over to the model section, and we can start with the chats model, right? Um, the way schemas work is you can define any number of schema based on the purpose. So a good example is create chat schema is uh, let's go ahead and import it. That is an object of the type chat. That is basically giving us some intelligence, really. We don't always have to put all the properties here because for a create chat schema, we know we expect the type to be present. That is array items, and it's basically the valid items, right? So that would be one of these three. What we're gonna do is just to make it a little bit easier, we're gonna say chat type is the type. So is that, and we can say const options is self. This just keeps everything close together, and we can just use the array over here to kind of tell. You expect the type to be a string, but only the valid options are chat type. Oops, that's not the right one. Chat type options. Those are the only valid responses. What else do we need here? We need the admins to be available. Array of. I wonder. Let me see. Yeah, it's an array of items of string type, and we can leave it as is for now. We don't need to add additional validation rules. Same thing for the participants. Yep. And lastly, for the settings as well. We're going to ignore settings because we don't really have any chat settings. In fact, I just want to get rid of the entire option over here, just because it may be better off being an entirely different entity. So yeah, so chat settings is no longer part of it. So when you're making a request, we're creating a chat, and those are the three properties that we're going to be passing into it. What we're going to do then is say const chat schema is another object. This will contain pretty much everything. That's all of these four properties. So we can go ahead and put that in here, and we can also add ID because we expect the ID to exist. And it's required. Perfect. We do want to say It's required. Participants and admins are also required, but I don't really need to have the validation here, at least for now. Oops, I want to make sure that. Okay. I believe there's ways to join rules together. I'm just trying to remember. Yeah, we may want to join the rules together somehow. That would be using the under. So let's build it out of this object, and what we'll do is for this one, it is everything that's in the create chat schema plus the ID. The reason why it's useful is because chat schema is also expected to have stuff for the DB record. So what we're going to do is we'll say the DB record schema is this object over here, and it has a partition key. Oh, come on. Partition key that is string, and that's required. Same thing for the sort key. Required. That's required, and created by. That's a string required, and you want to say updated at even though it's required, we want to be able to allow null. So it can be null. Actually, no, that's fine. It's just a number. That's not complicated too much. And then updated by is just a string. Right. So now we have our DB schema. It just helps to make this an object that we can coming in over here. Okay. For the actual child object, we want to make sure we're giving in everything from the DB record schema as well. That means that we want all of the partition key and the sort key and all that stuff to exist. However, we can add some more rules here to make sure that the partition key and the sort key are of a certain type, right? So you can say partition key is of a string, but you can give it a rule. So let's see, let's put yeah, so you can say it's a string, it's required, but it is supposed to follow a pattern that is of a regular expression, chat, or is it chats? Let me see. Oh, it's pronounced. Let me log back in. Okay, 1 second. back on the screen. So it is chats. Okay. And then we can go ahead and do the same thing for the sort key. And instead of it being chats, it has to start with this property caret just tells that the rule that sort key has to start with chat. Okay, so that's good. So that's how we can kind of override certain properties and keep the rest from the standard defaults. Next thing is we can, well, we got to use the schema somehow, right? So one of the places we can use this schema is it's basically the controller, so the chats controller. Let's talk about, because we created the create chat schema, let's start using it over here. So what we want to do is when the request comes in from the API, we want to be able to pipe the request and validate the input request to match our schema. And then when we're responding with data, we can basically do the same thing as well. So what we'll do is we'll say we need to create a new pipe. So we'll say for this endpoint, use some pipes. We'll call it validation pipe, and we'll tell it to require the schema that we need. So that is the one with the capital name. Okay, let's export it. So now that it's exported, we should be able to import it here, and we need to create a pipe. So let's go ahead and create a new. Yeah, let's go ahead and create a new pipe here. That is an injectable service. If you want to learn more about this, you should check out NestJS. So we'll go ahead and import one of these, and that is implementing a pipe transform. We can ask for things like logger, the constructor. I think that should be good enough for now. And what we want to do is we want to have, there's a method that needs to be implemented, right? So we'll go ahead and we'll say update the import, and then it requires you to implement the interface called transform. So yeah, what we want to do is, this is the value that's incoming, so I'm going to rename this to incoming value, and then metadata is stuff that you can pass into the argument. Yeah, okay, that's fine. What we will do here is we'll say incoming value equals we want to validate we want to do some kind of validation, right? So we'll say const we need, okay, so we do need one more object from here, that is object schema. And what this lets us do is lets us do some kind of validations. So we will say this validate incoming value. And this schema is actually over here. So let's go ahead and import it. Oh yeah, so let's get rid of this logger over here. We want to make sure we're passing in the schema. We can figure out logger later on, but yeah. If we need to do some kind of login, we can just create a brand new logger, which you can do like this. And then I think we can give it a name. Can you give logger a name? Oops. Constructor with a context. Yeah, that's right. So we'll say this is the context of that logger. So anytime it's being printed, we have the information where this log result is coming from. And sometimes the validation tends to be a little bit strict. So what we want to do is we want to say we want to pass in some kind of default validation options. So this method takes validation objects. So we're going to do that. The cool thing about this framework is that we can there we go. Okay. We can tell this to strip the unknown values. So for example, if the user is trying to create a chats control with a bunch of other properties that are not really appropriate, just trying to hack basically fool the API into taking in properties that are not appropriate, we can just say, yeah, if it's not in the schema, just ignore it. We don't care. And we want to also, whenever errors happen, it tries to return back in a error message in a format that's easy to read. So we want to also say, if errors happen, just wrap that label in square brackets so it's easier to read it. And we can say, hey, validate everything using the default validation options. And I believe we do want one more thing. So for example, over the wire, we may get a value that is JSON parsed as a string, but we want to make sure that it is a number. What we can do is we can say convert it. This is especially useful for date type properties. So we know that DB record expects date type to be passed in as a number, but sometimes maybe the client is trying to pass date time as a string, which is ISO format, the standard parsable format. We can try to cast it. It'll try to convert it. That is if you tell that it is a date time, which we might later on. But anyway, otherwise it'll convert strings to numbers, right? Or strings to dates, depending on what is in there. What's the target class? Okay, so error value are what's being returned by the validation. So what it will say, if an error is returned, we will just throw that request, just directly whatever's passed in from the framework. Otherwise, return the value. So this approach basically takes everything from the body, a request body. But if you recall, we also want to be able to query the parameters over here. So what we can do is we can add additional properties in the validation pipe constructor. For example, we can say by default it's going to read from the body. Otherwise, we can say let it accept another property here, private param type, and this param type comes directly from NextJS, and it's either body or query or param or custom, right? So you can essentially use this stuff to say incoming value. If it's coming, we'll say what we need to do here is we just have to say if the value is coming from the query string, make sure you load the values from the query. So I'm just going to type out the function first, and then we can get into the internals of it, right? So if the metadata of this pipe has a type query, we are going to do some work. Otherwise, we return query without modifying it. So over here, we just have to make sure that we read the query from the so all the query parameters, we just map it as a value, and then from here we can try to actually, that's probably not necessary. Sorry, I'm just getting a little ahead of myself. Yeah, I think that's fine. Round two. So it's coming from the body, and then that's going to validate the create chat schema. And then what we will do is we'll also go ahead and go down here, and we'll say use pipes, and actually we do have it copied, right? Okay, perfect. You can say query, but we do need a schema for the query here, so we're going to call it list messages query schema, and we'll just declare it right next to where the actual thing is declared. Export. Okay, and that is the type of the object, and we have to import joy. Perfect. All right, so after is a number, before is a number, limit is a number, and the default value is 50. It doesn't exist, and we can say order is string valid values are order options, and we're just going to say, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Ascending, descending. Oops, that is useful, but and I can just say type order, query order is ascending or descending, and that is a type over here. Yeah, and we can always say default descending. So the benefit of this is that we no longer have to use this kind of logic in the code. We don't have to say if it doesn't exist, use descending, because it's always going to make sure that it's a default value is provided. So same thing for the limit. Where is limit? Yeah, that is 50. We don't need it anymore, so we just delete that. I do believe default, it just helps to have this over here, and then you can always make this default order. Default order is descending. Just so we don't have magic numbers all over the code. Okay. So let's go ahead and import this one. And what we are expecting to see is the endpoints, both of them should still work. It should just validate the create chat schema, and the payload should come directly from there. Yeah, let's start this. Then once it's started, we are going to, let's see. Yeah, once it starts, we're going to test it out a little bit. It's the first time we're writing this. There might be a bug or two. Method no longer expects array arguments valid. Right. So where did I add dot valid? That is fine. This is not fine. It needs to be deconstructed in this manner. So I think that's probably okay. There we go. That's fine. I've used this framework before. That's why most of this is coming from memory. Okay. So let us reload, and we're going to log in. Let's get the sign-in token. And this is, let's get this. All right. So there that is. Let's authorize. Perfect. Let's still make sure that we are able to retrieve the chat. Try it out, create this, execute. Yeah, perfect. So we're able to retrieve it. And what we want to do is we want to create a new chat. So let's try this out. We don't need any of these four things. We do need this to be group or private, I believe. For now, we do. Let's say other. We want to make sure that the validation is kicking in and the errors are being thrown appropriately. so you'll get to see what's going on over there as well. So let's make sure that we add the appropriate admin and the participants, and then if you try to make a request here, it should say that the type must be one of self, private, group. Yeah, so that's basically the validation here. That's the Joy framework kicking in over there. So we'll just say private is a type of this chat, and let's go ahead and execute this. And there we go. We created a totally different chat at this point. And we can do the same thing over here to test the messages, the chat messages. And what we're going to do is we'll use the one that already has a bunch of messages. So yeah, let's just run this. It's got an error, and I wonder why that's an error. Let's see. Not found. Is that because it's weird? Not found. I wonder what is passed into here then. That is the list messages, right? So we'll go over here. Just curious. Let's all right. Let's just see what the chat ID is. All right. Let's run this again. And chat ID is an object. Okay, that's not what we were expecting to see, right? So maybe something went wrong with this stuff. Okay, so let's just see what's going on in this one. We have the incoming value. Let's log. Is that because, oh no, it is coming from the query. So what could it be? Yeah, let's print out all this stuff. And we also want to print out the metadata just so we have it. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so we can see some more of this stuff. All right. Another error. That's fine. What's going on here? So incoming value. Yes. So what's happening here is that it would run the validation on every single type of parameter. And what's happening here is that we only defined the parameter for query, but it's also running the parameters for ID. It doesn't exist, so it's just going to flat out strip the values. So what we're going to do is we're just going to say if the metadata dot type matches the param type that this particular instance of validation is supposed to run for, then do it. Then do the validation. Otherwise, just return whatever is the incoming value, and don't even bother with the validation. Okay, so that should be good. So this time around, when we try to execute this, we do expect to see our chat messages coming back. Okay, awesome. So And we can do some other validation here. So for example, limit has to be a positive number, right? So I can't give it like 100 negative items in the limit. So what we're going to do is we'll go back here to the list messages. I believe at the end we have the query over here. So we'll say it's a number, and the minimum has to be 5, and the maximum has to be 100. So that's basically the range that we're giving it to be valid. So actually, we don't need to give it a minimum. Well, no, it's true. We do have to give it a minimum. However, if it doesn't exist, it will default to 5, so it's not a problem. So this will be giving us an error. It says the limit must be greater than or equal to 5. So if you don't provide it, it should still be okay, because it's going to default to 50. But if you provide it, it's going to throw an error. But I just want limit to be greater than 0. So minimum has to be 1. So we can't provide a limit of 0. You won't get any messages back. You're just making an empty request. So yeah. So that's kind of how you add schema validations. The next thing we want to add is validation. Well, you want to be able to make sure that the output is parsed. We don't really like to see the internals, like the partition key and the sort key, from being sent to the client side. So we want to have a schema called API chat schema, for lack of a better name. So that is object, and that is going to be basically the same thing here, but it is going to be forbidden. Yeah, so that should help. Or I don't know if that's going to work, but we can definitely give it a try and see what ends up happening. We do have the chats controller. We just have to add an what is it called? We do need to add something called an interceptor in the NestJS world. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we're doing here is creating an interceptor that basically takes the response that's coming out of here, and it will morph it into the schema that we provide. So it's going to make sure that it is the API chat schema. Is it not exported? Yeah, that's right. Okay. So let's do that. And then we'll have to create a new file. So in the types, go ahead and create right. So I have a typo in here. It's with an O. So let's go ahead and create it. This extends What is it extending? Yeah, it implements don't worry about the generics here. It'll make sense in a second. So we do want to always pass in the schema, and that is coming from, I believe that's supposed to be object schema. That's coming from over here. Okay. What we're going to do next is implement the method intercept. Yep. And that is going to return next handle I believe this is coming from RxJS map, and we'll have to basically say we need to convert the data, right? So basically what we have to do is we have to say joy dot basically call a method from here called attempt that will attempt to convert the object into the schema. So data schema, and then what else does it need? This is the options. So if there's an error, we want to say there is a validation failure, and we want to also say give it options. That is, yeah, what are the options? They're basically the default options. I believe we want to. Let's take a look at here. What is here? These are the default options, so we'll make sure we just take these default options. Yeah. And I believe that should help. Oh, right. You want to say const converted value is equal to this one, and then we can return the converted value. Yeah. We don't really need the context, we just need the next handler in this thing. So hopefully that should help us. And what we expect to see now is that if we try to actually wait, the better option is over here. When we retrieve the chat, we want to make sure that we don't get the partition key and the sort key anymore. Okay, no errors. So let's go back up, and we're going to say retrieve this. So we have an error. What is it? Yes, the error says partition key is not allowed. So that's kind of what I was worried about. It doesn't actually remove it for us, so we will have to this is not ideal at all. So I'm going to create a method Actually, I'm not going to do this. I want to just look at the, is there any utils? Okay, so we do have utils. And then we have, okay, so I'm just going to call it helpers. I don't know what else to call it, but we need a couple of methods here that simplify what we're about to do. Basically, we're just going to take in the existing DB record schema. So, come on, help me import it. Thank you. So, remove strip props. The object can be any, and then the props are the names of the properties. And what's going to happen here is we're just going to say that, and we want to remove partition key and sort key are the two properties that we want to exclude. Get rid of this. This is the method that we're going to call, and let's go ahead and implement this. So keys from Lodash of the object, what we'll say filter so that the key is not in the list, and then we can say map it so that key returns object, and then object key is equal to the actual object's key. We're going to call it value, maybe, just to kind of, so, and then we return the object, and then we can say reduce, just join everything. And then start off with empty. So what this is going to do is just return a version of the schema that doesn't include partition key and the sort key. So hopefully that should help with cleaning up some of the properties. So we can give it a try right now. So yeah, so there we go. So now we're sending the responses back, and this time around we no longer include the partition key and the sort key. Yeah, perfect. So a little bit of cleaning up is there, and some more tedious stuff which I don't really think is ideal for screencasts. Things like making sure that all the endpoints are appropriately using interceptors and pipes, and making sure that the database, making sure that the models right before they're saving, instead of just using, instead of just casting it as a model, it's actually going to use the schema now, so that it can take any generic object and cast it into the appropriate schema. So I'm not going to do that on all live, so I'm just going to do it offline. And in the next session, we are going to jump back to adding general error handlers based on the type of errors that we've been throwing throughout the development. So, for example, here we have a not found and not authorized, but they're all currently it's always going to return 500, but we want to return 404, right? So that sort of stuff is going to be implemented next, and yeah. So see you in the next.